up, guys? Welcome to Market Curry. I'm Rahul.
I'm Shikhar.
So, we just finished off our podcast with Dimitri Bianco. I think most of the people know him.
Yeah.
He has a lot of good videos on YouTube. He's a very good account on LinkedIn.
Yeah, and he's done his masters in applied economics from University of Michigan. Why not quantitative finance? You'll get to know when you watch the video. And then he went on to work in risk management initially in Santander Bank. Prior to that, a couple of more companies like BCG, and now he's working as the head of quantitative risk and research at Agora Data Incorporated. So it was a lovely conversation.
Very good conversation. We learned a lot about his experience and the financial crisis time. And you can watch his YouTube channel to know more about Quant and how to build your resume.
Yeah.
And FRM if you are looking out for it.
Yeah, I mean, hope this video is useful to you all, and see you in the video then.
See you in the video. Yeah. Hi Dimitri, how's it going?
Good. How are you?
We're good,
We're good, we're good.
Since it's a weekend, it's raining in Boston.
Yes.
That is what usually happens.
It seems like every time I'm in Boston, I do hit rain, so
Yeah.
I can feel you.
Yeah,
Yeah.
it's been really bad since the past week and a half also.
Yeah.
Yeah. So thank you so much for doing this. We'll just straight dive into it. I mean, first of all, we would want to start about your thoughts on quantitative finance and why you chose that area.
Okay.
Yeah.
So quant finance, man, it was 2000 and so I went to school long ago. It was 2008 through like 2011 is when I went to my undergrad. Quant finance was already imploding at that point. So many of you know, 2007, 2008 financial crisis. That kind of exploded, and then it was very negative to be a quant. So there was a big like hype train building up to that, and probably in 2003, 2004 through 2007, we saw a ton of financial engineering masters just kind of springing up. And then as I finished my undergrad, I was in finance, and that's all I wanted to do is work in finance. I had no idea what I wanted to do. My dad was in business, might as well just go into business and do something. And then I got to my last semester and realized I wanted to work on Wall Street. That was like the dream, right? I mean, a lot of young guys dream. You want to work on Wall Street and be with the traders in the pits. And then all my teachers are telling me, Dimitri, these things don't exist anymore. Like there's pits, and they show like video. Teacher brought in videos, and it's just like dead quiet. Like there's like people standing around. They've got like a tablet or something, and they're like putting orders in. And back in 2000, early 2000s or mid 2000s, I'm imagining still like this trading environment of people yelling and like the cry system of yelling orders and doing hand signals. And our teachers were even telling us stories about, there was actually a lady that worked on the floor, and it was so competitive. She was pregnant, like 8-9 months pregnant, like just ready to do. And so they built her like this cage thing that she wore, like went over her shoulders and gave her a little bit of space so they didn't bump her, but it was still like that crazy excitement. And then by the time, 2007 rolls around, 2009, 2010, markets had already really kind of collapsed into digital technology. And, you could be in anywhere in the US, you could be in another country, it doesn't matter where you're at, you could be trading. But I didn't realize it until my final semester of my finance degree. I spent all this time on Bloomberg terminals and doing Morningstar, and they give you the pretty little 5-star review on a company. And I'm like, this makes no sense. But then I took my last semester, and it was a financial engineering course. So none of us had really heard of it. I went to a generic state school, and it was a finance PhD student who had a master's in mathematics and was really, really excited about doing math and finance. And so the only reason the course existed is because she had an interest. Like no one else in the school knew about it. And she taught this course, and it was super simple. It was like on like swaps. So how do you calculate a swap, like fixed and floating and back and forth? And I remember thinking like, this is really interesting, really practical, a little more challenging than your typical, net present value calculation. Like, here's some cash flows. Tell me what the values are going to be on this project. But then it finally hit me that last semester in finance, like, no one on Wall Street is doing traditional finance. There's still funds out there, picking funds like, I think, Tesla's a really fun, company, and Elon Musk's a great guy, so I'll buy it. There's still those funds out there. But it wasn't until that course I realized I needed math and stats. And of course, it's too late, right? I'm graduating here in a couple months. I didn't know what to do. And so I just kind of made the determination I'm going to go into quantitative finance, being completely naive to the fact that there were other fields of mathematics that you needed.
Hmm.
And so then I went and I applied that year for graduate school. And of course, being an arrogant finance student, I thought I'm going to apply to Columbia. I think like maybe NYU, Cornell, Princeton. Like I'll get into one of these programs. And of
Yeah.
course, I had a backup school, which is my undergrad for a master's in economics. They gave me full ride, but I was like, this is not financial engineering. Being in Washington State in the Northwest, there's no finance jobs.
No
Like,
finance, right?
yeah, you got to get out. And so I ended up deciding to just keep working. So I got rejected by everybody. Like no one wanted to talk to me, no wait list, nothing. It was just like, you're clearly not a candidate. So I worked for a year and then came back and I was like, okay, this time I'm going to do this a lot smarter. I'm going to still apply to like Columbia, which was the dream program. You know, I'm reading books on Emmanuel Derman. It's like, oh, it'd be amazing to work with him. And then I started applying to all these other schools. Like I got an offer from Claremont, so Claremont's program. And then I got one from University of Michigan and a few other schools in the middle I applied to, didn't get offers from, and ended up going with Michigan just because I think Claremont wanted like $100,000 a year for tuition. And they were going to dual me up with like an MBA plus a financial engineering master's. And they had some prerequisites I had to take. And I'm like, you know, LA's expensive, $100,000 tuition. Like I'm going to be into this probably like 200 just in tuition. And then I'm looking at maybe even more if I have to do the MBA tagged on the side. So anyways, I went to Michigan, did the financial engineering program there, started the first semester. Again, severely disadvantaged. I didn't have all the math. A lot of the calculus you take as a business student is in your first year, like freshman year, maybe sophomore year, those 2 years. And then you don't take math, right? You're just doing accounting, which it's math, but it's not really math. And so at that point, I had a decision to make, and Michigan's program was feuding. The Ross Business School was fighting with the engineering department and LSNA, which is the math department. And they're like, more math, more rigor. And the business school is like, no, more networking, more finance, like more fun events. And so they couldn't come to an agreement. So they canceled the program. And then you had the option to either stay in the program, finish the master's, or, you know, figure something out. Like you go do you, but you still owe the tuition on it. So I realized I was already behind in the math. I needed time to study. I found out the applied economics master's there had only 5 core courses. So I was able to use all of my electives for that as financial engineering electives. I kind of created my own financial engineering degree. I'd have time to study. I had to take off a semester to catch back up because, you know, like classes are only offered. This class only offered in the spring and the fall. So I took a semester off, just studied mathematics, read textbooks, tried to catch up on everything I learned in the first semester from financial engineering. And then by the time I hit my econ master's, I was like on par with everybody else. I caught back up on some of the basic math. And then that's kind of what kicked off my career there. And I just ended up landing a job in risk management and then doing that for the last 8-9 years now, something like that.
So, what do you mean by math? Because what we have in our math, and so I took an elective on computational methods in finance. So I have time series that includes everything, and then we have Brownian motion and partial derivatives, all of that kind. What do you really mean by math? Like, whatever I just told you just takes 2 or 3 weeks to learn. So, what did you do in your 6 months, or what did you do in your entire course?
Okay, so let's rewind here. So to freshen up on my math, I hadn't done calculus in probably like 4 years. So having to go back and do like when you had assignments, so in financial engineering, right, you have like your homework assignments are coming in very quick. And I'd have to go back and review everything. So I started all the way at the beginning when I reviewed math. So I went through like Calc 1, Calc 2, Calc 3, and then having to go in specifically ODEs, PDEs, like just trying to refresh. Because part of it too, as a business student, is we don't differentiate things like ODE and PD. I don't remember that. It was just like business math is just like combined, like everything's in one. And so you're kind of hitting everything in a class, but you're not spending the time to dig deep enough on it. So even like professors were telling me, I can't remember what they were telling. It was like a simple calculation. And I'm like asking questions like, I don't get this. And they have these terms and these terms don't mean anything. And then I would go and get a textbook and I'm looking and I'm like, oh, we're just taking the integral here. Like they didn't explain kind of the simple pieces. So a lot of the math is just around calculus, just catching back up on kind of basic concepts and, you know, how to get through those steps.
And which textbook did you refer to? Was it Steve Shreve? or something else?
For the reviewing of the math?
Math, yeah.
Oh man, it was a bunch of them. They had textbooks at the library. A buddy of mine went to Ohio State. They had their own version of Calculus 1 to 3. It was like a huge book, and that book itself was just beneficial just to like, you can skip through the chapters, read kind of the summaries and the intros, and then, it all starts coming back to you here a few years later.
Got it.
Yeah, that's great. Let's just talk about your risk job experience. So you wanted to go into risk, or you thought of bridging that gap between quant risk and risk advisory, like delivering an internal audit to bridge it towards a quant risk profile, or what's the motive of you going for a risk role?
Okay, so I'll debunk risk. I never knew what risk was. This was not even a term when I started in 2014.
Yeah.
It's a new thing now. I don't know why, but so the banks, if you think about pre-2007, the banks were, quants was a really common term, and every bank had big teams of quants. And then magically in post-2010, there was no quants in the banks.
Okay.
It's just a label. Because the issue was when Dodd-Frank passed in 2010 for regulatory requirements, we could no one wanted to say like, oh, this quant blew up, a $6 billion position in 2007. It was much more palatable to say, oh, there's a risk manager who's actually monitoring and measuring and modeling the risk on this. But to your point, when I graduated, I thought I wanted to go into trading, right? That's what everybody goes into. I want to go into the investing side. It'll be fun. And in my mind, I never wanted to go into credit risk. So credit being like loans, credit card, all that kind of product. In my mind, that was like the traditional finance kind of side of it. And people kept telling me there's more math on that side. And I'm like, it doesn't really seem like it, right? I mean, a loan is a loan is a loan. This is way too simple. So in my mind, I never wanted to go into credit. Like that was like the boring path that no one wanted to go into. And then when I started, I got 2 job offers. So how I got to this, I applied to all these jobs. I had a finance background. I had work experience doing corporate finance, accounting, and operations. And so I made this resume that was like everything under the sun, right? I was the everything candidate. I could do corporate finance, accounting, econometrics, statistical modeling, financial engineering, like you name it, I could do it. And magically, no one would hire you. And now looking back, right, as a hiring manager, I'm like, this makes sense, right? I don't want someone that just knows a tiny bit of everything. Like I'm hiring you to do a job. I just need you to be good at that job. And then we can, think about you developing in other roles later. So I rewrote the resume and I failed. I think it was over 100 resumes. I interviewed with all kinds of crazy companies. Like one of them was like an egg company. It was a company that grew chickens and sold eggs out of Iowa. And I was just desperate for a job, and it was a finance job. Luckily, I failed the interview because I missed one of the Excel formulas. So I was like, dodge the bullet. If not, I would have been selling eggs. But when I looked back at that, writing that resume, I realized like I kind of just gave up. And I realized like I only care about statistics. That was what I really enjoyed doing in my master's programs. I didn't care about, derivative pricing. I didn't care about capital markets. I already had the finance background. I just wanted to do statistics. Like I wanted to sit down, code, and build models. So I rewrote my resume just to do that. And I highlighted all like the econometrics courses and financial engineering stats courses and all that. And I ended up getting 2 job offers within like a couple months, to my surprise. And I didn't realize at the time statistics model development was in high demand. And that was really what quants were doing. I kind of sold into this picture that everybody was doing derivative pricing. Everyone was doing Ito's lemon stochastic calculus. And then, just kind of throwing my hands up and not doing that, I ended up getting 2 job offers in the banking side doing risk management, which I didn't know what that was. It was like, I just want to build models. Like, I don't care what you call it. Just let me build stuff. And so I ended up landing a job in risk management, which is really just model development. So, people think I look at things like VAR. I've never touched VAR. We don't look at VAR, CVAR. I'm not a portfolio manager. We're modeling things out, for example, and this was kind of an evolution over my career. I started in regulatory risk. So I was doing time series modeling, and really I was modeling the balance sheet and the income statement. So back to accounting. For Dodd-Frank, the requirement is you have to forecast your assets, your liabilities, your income, and your expenses from all these different accounts. So I was working on model development for real estate portfolios. And we had to come up with a stress test, which is part of the CCAR DFAST kind of Dodd-Frank framework. And we had to say, okay, this bank was stuck now with a bunch of mortgages that defaulted in 2007. I was actually modeling now the expenses tied to those accounts that you don't think about. But when you have all these, like, I don't know, 1,000 houses or something, or 500 houses, or I don't know how many there were, you have all these houses, someone has to pay to mow the yard, right? Because if not, now the city's going to be fining the owner of the house, and the owner of the house is the bank. If the bank wants to get this house flipped and off its books, a lot of these houses were gutted. So, plumbing, electrical was stripped out of the walls because the cost of copper, appliances were taken out and trash, carpet, floor was torn out. So this bank had to go back in and actually pay to fix all these things over time. And they're trying to unload all these mortgages, all these houses, because they don't want them on their books. Like, no one's living in them. And it's just this big expense now to maintain all these properties here. So my career started in doing that. And then risk management, and then it switched over into modeling like credit card portfolios and mortgages. I worked for one of the big consulting firms. I actually got to work on Wall Street, which is kind of a big dream, to take the subway every day. And I got off at Wall Street and I walked all the way down to the water. But we're modeling like customer default, or we were modeling, for example, credit card defaults, like looking at transaction level, looking at the data coming into these transactions, figuring out who's going to default on these credit cards. What do you do with those defaults? How do you report those as well? Right. So when we look at buying and selling stocks, and let's say you buy, I don't know, bank XYZ or something, some made up bank, you have to actually look at their assets and their liabilities. So when people are actually doing that, there's someone actually behind the scenes now at the bank actually modeling those losses. And then we're putting those on a forecast so that, when executives go and talk or regulatory reports come out, someone has to report that. You can't just say like, yeah, I think we're going to have, great profits for the next 12 months. Like, investing firms are going to want to know that. So I think risk management as a term has kind of been lost. It doesn't mean anything anymore, which is unfortunate. And to shed light on that too, right? My wife actually works in risk management. When you have a firm, you can think about like the CRO is the head, and then there's something called enterprise risk management, and there's something called governance. These are all business jobs. Yep. So they're looking at like document tracking, and there's things called SR letters from the regulators. You have to track how many of these letters come out, and the regulators just keep piling on more and more regulations. So you have to start tracking all those and making sure you're keeping up with them. So I think when a lot of people hear risk management, they go, oh, Dimitri's doing that, right? He's tracking documents in Excel. He's got inventories, these sorts of boring things. But I think there's often a misconception of what risk management really is. And often they don't realize we're actually building the pricing models behind the scenes, or the origination models and the servicing models and all these other models behind the scenes. And banks are this massive conglomerate where, when I was consulting down in New York, there was over 100 of them on a floor. So you put that in contrast to like an investing fund, you might have 10 quants, 20 quants, these smaller funds. And then you get into Wall Street and there's like, a team of 30 validators, 30 model developers, bigger firms like the big ones like JP Morgan, Citi, you're going to have hundreds. So risk, I think, has taken a weird turn, and the terms kind of gotten blended a little bit. So it's hard to kind of differentiate what we mean when we say risk management.
Yeah, I mean, I was just talking with Rahul right before our call. I worked in risk advisory for a couple of years, and I failed to understand what transition was made by you to go from internal audit to a quant risk and modeling domain. So that was my question that I wanted to ask.
Yeah, so I actually went full circle weirdly. So I started in model implementation, and then I started doing model development because I didn't have enough people. So I was doing implementation and development, and I did that for a year. And then I went to BCG, to your point, and I was started off on my first contract doing internal audit. So we brought in a team of people that actually wrote academic papers, and they were using some cutting edge new methodology. And we had to just write documents, do the auditing, sign off that everything was done correctly by development and validation. And then all of a sudden my job switched, and they said, oh, time series? Like, that's what you spent the last year developing? Can you just be our validator on model validation? So I switched back over to validation now, doing that. And I ended up helping them actually build the models and get all that done for regulatory purposes. And then I ended up going back full circle when I went to Santander in New York City, and I was back doing validation, which is kind of like model development again. And now finally I'm back at Agora through this whole cycle. And now I'm running everything. So I'm head of model development, validation, analytics and all that.
So for a minute, I just thought I was watching your video on Brownian motion because the way you explained everything, I just went back into it. So my next question would be, how does a day in your life look like? Like you mentioned, you cover everything, model development, research, and validation. So what does it really look like? And could you dive a bit deeper into it?
Yeah, I can give you two perspectives. I'll give you an individual contributor perspective, which is what
Hmm.
most people end up doing, and then I can give you a high-level senior management kind of role here.
Hmm.
Individual contributors. So I give you like a day at Santander when I was there. It was pretty slow. So I think the sell side being on the banks is actually amazing for quants. I don't have to be there when the market starts, right?
Yeah.
Like the assets in the bank's going to be there whenever it's there. Like it's just there. So
Hmm.
I would roll in probably like 8:30, 9 o'clock, but no one cares. Like if you had like, I don't know, the subway was late or, coffee sounded good and I wanted to stop somewhere and I got in at 9:30, 9:45, it didn't really matter. No one was watching you. No one's babysitting you. I think that's been one of the big advantages of being at the banks. And I would just sit down at my computer. I'd typically make coffee at the office because every bank typically has free coffee. And then, of course, my colleagues are all sitting there and they want to chat. So now I'm catching up on, what did you do on the weekend? Or, Amazon came and assembled some furniture for you yesterday, something of nonsense. And so that typically takes, I don't know, 30 to 45 minutes in the day. And then after that, I finally sit down and I'm checking emails and making sure I'm at the meetings I'm supposed to be at, responding back to other teams. So when I worked on model validation, people that don't know, someone builds the model, someone validates the model. You work a lot with them, and then often there's a business involved who's actually using the model. But you're just responding to those sorts of emails, checking those, making sure you're on top of it. And then the majority of my day was just coding. And when I say coding, I mean more or less like scripting. So I try to differentiate that with people. Model development, model validation goes linearly. There is no like classes. I'm not pulling in all these different pieces and optimizing the code. It's, pulling in data, doing data cleaning, doing variable selection, defining the dependent variables, doing the actual model fitting and development, doing all statistical testing. And then throughout this whole process, you have to document. Because I could spend 3 months on a project and I'm going to forget what I did a month ago because there's other things going on. And so a typical day is just me sitting down in either SAS or Python, and it's just a lot of programming. It's going through and checking assumptions and modeling and pulling data in. And then often you have like a textbook and you're like, somebody did this test, but this doesn't sound right or the results look weird. And you're not going to know everything. So you have time to go and look and research and pull up results and all that sort of stuff. And then I had lunches in the middle of the day. I always had lunch with colleagues. So some colleagues always went out to lunch. I found a lot of the older colleagues typically bring their own lunches. And so I would just spend the time, just chatting about sports, college sports, gardening, like anything that's people's kids, like you just get to know people. And then you have a handful of meetings throughout the week as an individual contributor. There's not a ton. So the skills are going to be focused more on, again, modeling, stats, coding. Like it's kind of this process and it's nice and slow, but you have to learn to write a lot. And then when you finish projects, we often did presentations. So I'd have to present it to validation team. So I'd present it to our head of model validation and the other directors, and you'd have to get buy-in that you did it correctly. And then they would sign off that your project was good. So you kind of get this blend of programming, people skills, some meetings, but it's a nice kind of slow process. There are fire drills where perhaps a project was never assigned to you and they forgot the due date is in like a month. And so you have to drop everything and work overtime to do it.
Yeah.
But most of the job's been pretty relaxed on that side. Now, in contrast to that, when you start to get into management, senior management, running teams, a lot of your day is spent just doing tedious tasks. So now when I get my coffee quickly, I sit down, I have to check all of my meetings. As an individual contributor, I'd have like 2-3 meetings a week. Now I can have 3 to 5 meetings a day. When I was a director at one of the firms, I was in about 6 to 8 hours of meetings per day. And then you're also required to actually get your actual job done on top of just attending these tedious meetings. Luckily, where I'm at now, being a startup, we don't have as many meetings. So it might be a couple hours a day. But a lot of your processes, working with employees, work gets submitted to you, it's reviewing the work, it's coming up with solutions quickly to get them to go back and look at it. So you kind of sit as an advisory role of understanding when things are going to be wrong or how they could potentially be wrong, and then challenging that. Since I'm at a startup, I also do all the individual contributor work. So I'm still building models behind the scenes. A good day for me is coding 6 to 8 hours. Like, it's just the fun part. I rather code than deal with people. But you do spend, as you get kind of up the ranks, you spend more and more time in meetings and communicating ideas. I think the hardest part of my job is having to communicate technical issues to non-technical people. So often I'll say like, this model is great, whatever, it passed, but you can't use it. And then they're like scratching their heads like, what do you mean I can't use it? And it's trying to explain to them like, it was developed to do A, and I know you want to use it for B and C, but then trying to explain like the nuanced details of like statistically it's not going to come out to be, robust in your scenario, and we would have to do extra testing. So as you kind of climb the ranks, a lot of it is kind of that bigger picture, but it's being able to scale the nuanced details of why someone can't do something all the way up to the bigger picture of like, presenting models to the board or to, investors and explaining why we're doing what we're doing, getting buy-in for that. And then also you spend a lot of time hiring, which is really big time suck. So, I mean, you can spend, I don't think a lot of people realize, right? You post a job, you get 100, 200, 300 applications. You have to review all that. You have to go through all the interview processes. And then you have to make the worst decision, which is at the very end, you have to pick someone. And it's never like there's an all-star that's like, this is the obvious choice and everybody else is horrible. You end up with like a group typically at the end and you're like, who do I pick? And why do I pick them? And what skills are they going to bring to the table? And how are they going to make my job easier? Like, I don't think most candidates realize that. Like, as a manager, I have to do everything. So if I can find someone that can take a part of my work off my plate and make my job easier, like that's going to be the candidate I hire. So there's a lot of that. So when you move up towards senior management, there's just a lot more meetings, a lot more communication, typically a lot less modeling, especially in the banks when you become like an associate director or a director or a senior director or managing director. You just get further away. Like you don't get to do the fun coding as much. And so there's kind of that balancing point of what you want to do. And some people will actually stick with an individual contributor role their whole career. So I've had people in their 50s and they're like, leave the meetings to the business people. I just want to code. And I get that. It makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, so it was lovely to talk about the hiring part, and I think both of us, and in fact a lot of other people who are searching for jobs or would be looking for jobs in the future would have this question. So let's just dive deeper into. You were there on the other side of the recruitment process, and now you're hiring and you're in charge. So what do you look at inside a resume of a candidate, or in terms of the personality of the candidate, and in case the person is from like not an Ivy League college or a tier 2, tier 3 college in the US, how can they make it into a quantitative job description or possibly a role in quantitative finance?
Okay, so everyone's going to view it differently. There are obviously target schools, as you're hinting at, right? I mean, if you're at one of the big name schools, everybody knows who Columbia is, or NYU, or Princeton, or something like that. I think part of it, though, is there's actually an edge that most people at other schools don't see. And that's going to be the people that are actually helping those tier 1 students write resumes. They're actually writing a better resume because they often team up with the industry. So, for example, NYU is a perfect example of this. They have an amazing career advisor there that helps them put resumes together and do all that. Peter Carr, when he ran the program and hired her on, she actually worked for Morgan Stanley with Peter Carr. So she was already doing the recruiting. She was kind of on the other side. So she was able to help students think better structure resumes and write them. For advice in general, it's trying to put the skills on the resume that the company wants. So I posted a video today. I'll kind of touch on some of this. And somebody mentioned, can you just show me what does a good resume look like? And it's challenging because it depends what you're hiring for. And I think every single candidate is unique. And I think that's the key that most people are missing, right? Everyone builds the standard financial engineering resume: stochastic calculus, derivative pricing, computational finance, numerical methods. Like, you list it the same. Now you start looking like every other candidate and you have no advantage. So the advice is, when you write the resume, is figure out what you want to do. Don't figure out what the companies want. Figure out what you want to do, and then write the resume very detailed in that one area. Don't try to cover everything. I can tell you the most useless skill for most model development teams is C++ and C#, and everybody has it on the resume. And even when I'll start picking people apart on like boost libraries on C++ or like smart pointers, they don't have a clue. So it's like, it's weird. Like everyone's kind of regurgitating that, this is what I think they want. So you're putting that on their resume. Write the resume that you want with the skills you want to do, and then go find job descriptions that match that. You'll be really surprised that you have like weird one-off projects that you did that are on things that you want to do, and you'll actually find companies that are hiring to kind of marry those two skills together. I think part of the problem to those students is you don't know what you want to do, right? I mean, I've never worked in the industry. Like even when I started, I was doing completely different things than I kind of thought, but it was kind of sticking to my roots of trying to do statistical modeling and building the resume out to match that.
And so whenever I was looking for a job in a quant risk role, I used to go to the company's profile on LinkedIn. Then I would look up the people, and they would usually have people from either UCLA or CMU, one of the big universities. So what are some of the target roles that the tier 2 and tier 3 colleges can target for? Like
What do you
what
mean, firms?
companies? Yeah, all the firms and the roles.
Forget buy side.
Okay.
That's the best advice I can give you. Buy side is very pretentious. I'm gonna throw it out there. They think it matters. And I did a video with Carnegie Mellon's hiring data on their information. What most people don't realize is, like I mentioned, the banks are hiring a lot of people.
Yeah.
The investing firms are hiring a few people. So it's far more competitive, and everyone wants to end up on the banking or the investing side of it.
Yeah, the buy side.
But the secret is getting the skills the banks want. And the reason for this is the buy side's too lazy. They don't want to train you. Okay. Right? Why would I train you when I can go to the big banks and poach someone with 2 years of experience and pay you almost the same price versus, hiring someone on and doing all that training? When I look at resumes, I don't even look, I do. I look at the schools. And it does matter to a point, because you start to understand the personality of the recruiting of that school. There's a top ranked program out there, and every one of their candidates I've ever worked with, everyone I've interviewed, always has an attitude issue. I don't know why, but I still try to put that aside. And I think most firms do try to put it aside to be like, okay, it's from this school. Like they're going to be a real difficult person to deal with. But I think it comes back to the skill set of trying to figure out the skills that the company is wanting. I mean, I've even looked at people, recently, I'm looking at like state schools that are like, they don't have quant programs. Like I almost hired a professor from University of Montana in psychology. But the guy wrote a book in statistics on a lot of the stuff we were working on, but in completely different fields here. I think the advantage you're going to have being from a state school is just really focusing in on the skill set. Because as to your point, right, if you're coming from like UCLA or CMU, you have the name brand. You're going to have the alumni network that's going to say, oh, I went to Carnegie Mellon as well. So I'm going to give you an interview. It's going to be harder when you're coming from a second or third tier school. But I think if you can put interesting projects on that resume, it'll really stand out. Also, focus. I see so many resumes that have this weird mix of like, you want to do like portfolio optimization, and then they'll do like a banking project, like a CCAR forecasting, and then they'll do a Bitcoin project, and then they're doing an NLP project. And I'm
what you mentioned in the video this morning.
Yeah. And I don't get it. Like I'll give you an example. I went to one of the schools for recruiting, and it was a statistics career fair. Every single student that approached my desk, and I stood there from, I think like 10 a.m. till 3, and I stayed late till like 3:30 or 4. Every single student that came to my desk talked about NLP and neural networks. And I'm like, you have a statistics master's and a PhD. Like, I don't get it. Like, NLP is cool. And I figured out, I think the university was kind of telling the students, like, that's the hot new skill. Put it on your resume. Take this one class. But I think students are missing the point. Like, ignore the universities. They don't know what's going on. They don't work in the industry, right? They're
so I wanted to ask a question about this as well. So in our program, machine learning and artificial neural networks is not covered. But after doing some research, I found after you're done with time series, like after you understood everything in time series, the next step is machine learning. So would you suggest us to take a machine learning course or a artificial neural network course?
Take machine learning. Don't waste your time on neural nets. Neural nets are very trendy, but they're not very practical.
Got it.
And part of it is because they become so large, you have to have larger frameworks often, and they become a lot more black boxed. So there's actually an interesting paper by Agusu Gianto on taking ReLU activation. And you can actually break the neural network down into essentially like a stepwise function where you have like it's a linear model.
Yeah, OLS.
Yeah. But most people aren't doing that. Most people are going to be doing things like decision trees, so XGBoost, random forest, lasso regression, like things you cover in a machine learning course. I would focus on like just general machine learning, and that should tie into your understanding of statistics because machine learning is really just a category in statistics.
Yeah.
And if you can put all that together, I think then that gives you a little bit of an edge of you could build models. So like at a bank, for example, we might use logistic regression, right? Traditional statistics. We might also use an XGBoost or a light GBM model. Again, we're all doing the same problem. It's the same exact problem. It's just different methods for it. Yeah, so focus on that. It's when people start getting into like image processing or like natural language processing, it's like, it's cool, right? But you're probably not going to have a lot of use for it in the finance space.
Makes sense.
Got it.
I don't think I have any other question. I think this was a great closure for the episode. And thank you so much, Dimitri, for your time on this podcast. We hope to get you in again for an episode if we want to do something with you, which I'm sure we will.
Yeah.
So perfect. Thanks a lot.
Thank you, Dimitri. Thank you for agreeing to be on the pod. And we'll list on all of your handles like LinkedIn and YouTube. And your videos are really good. All of your YouTube videos. Like I told you, I woke up, I opened YouTube, and I saw a video of you, and then I started watching it. Your content is great. That's
Thanks. What I'm saying. Are you guys having fun doing your podcast?
Yeah.
Yep.
It is fun. It is fun to talk to a lot of people and learn from them, learn about their experiences. Like whatever we used to do on our own calls with people, we are just doing it on a camera
and sharing it with all the audience that we are able to garner, whatever limited audience.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Okay.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thank you.
Okay.